Tonight on Let It Rip. From a deadly riot at the U.S. Capitol, challenging the election results, to the ongoing fight against COVID-19, and a school shooting tragedy right here at home. Tonight, we take a look back at some of the biggest stories of 2021 and look ahead to what could be making headlines in 2022. Time to let it rip on the panel tonight. She is the former Michigan Secretary of State, now a state senator from Holly. Ruth Johnson is back. And so is the media consultant, policy analyst, and co-host of the No BS News Hour podcast, Karen Dumas, along with author, reporter, public relations guru, Greg Bowens, plus former state senator turned millionaire businessman and chairman of the Oakland County Republican Party, Andrew Rocky Richkowski. And as always, the hardest working man in broadcasting, anchor attorney Charlie Langton. All right, tonight we're going to talk about the top headlines of 2021, some of the stories we may have missed, and what might happen in 2022. Our viewers have sent in their choices too, and no surprise, panel, the number one story online in Michigan, across the country, and the world is still COVID. Ruth, the hospitals are packed, 800,000 people now dead, but a recent survey said that 60% of us have now COVID fatigue. So what's the answer?
Yeah, I think most of us have COVID fatigue. It's been a very difficult couple of years for people of our state and really globally. The COVID pandemic's not something that any of us have lived through in our lifetimes. And unfortunately, right now, we're speaking to doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals that are working in Michigan's hospitals to treat more patients than ever since the beginning of the pandemic. So it's really disheartening place to be at this point. And then, of course, in my area, we had the horrific shootings at Oxford High School. So it's not been an easy year.
Not at all. And Karen, on airplanes, school board meetings, in stores, we're confronting each other over masks, vaccines. Are we now more angry at each other than the virus?
I think we're frustrated, Huel, because messaging surrounding COVID has been so inconsistent. And I think it's confused a lot of people. I think that because we've not been presented with kind of a clear agenda for an exit strategy, I think that's frustrating. And then we as Americans always look for the great divide. So whatever, differences we have, we side behind that and are quick to point the other finger. So it has become the divide of this year, at least.
And Greg, there's also the great resignation. Millions of people quitting their jobs. Will they ever come back?
Yeah, I do think that the COVID, the pandemic has changed the workplace forever, to be honest with you. One of the things that we found out is some companies have figured out how to be more productive. For example, call centers where you had like DTE downtown and you have all these people in one giant room making phone calls. And now they're given a computer and they're making calls from home. And that saves a lot of overhead. It saves on traffic. It saves on gas. And so it's interesting in the way that before office space was starting to get tight. And now the market for office space has, really loosened up. And we don't know if people are ever going back. So big, giant buildings like the Renaissance Center, are as empty as they ever want to be. And I've heard people starting to have discussions about whether or not those buildings, some office buildings can be converted now into living spaces. I can only imagine what it must be like as well when it comes to white collar workers and the idea of relocating and the expenses that are associated with that, considering that people are spending more time at home and their home office is now a real office. And so, it's really turned things upside down. There are a lot of pluses to it, I think, from the perspective that people have now been able to try and find ways to reconnect with family, reconnect with close friends, create meaningful bubbles, not just bubbles of interest for business, but bubbles of friendship that sustain you through these kind of times. So, yeah.
And Rocky, as both a businessman and a logistics expert, you know firsthand how inflation has gone wild. Is this the new normal?
It may be, but inflation's caused predominantly by the printing of money and the excess money that we have, the cash supply that means absolutely nothing. And people are concerned about prices going up. So they're buying a lot more. And when they're buying a lot more, you have less of that product and then prices go back up. And then the federal government is just printing more money that now nobody is buying but our own Federal Reserve. And we're creating this perpetual motion of more debt, lifting the debt ceiling, and it's really boding not well for this administration and their finance policy of how to run the government and our finances. But something that Karen said I think was absolutely correct, and that is that we're starting to see, Karen was talking about the messaging a little bit. I'm starting to see that this year, more than last year, we're realizing that the experts are just making things up as they go along. And now we're starting to hear a lot more about natural immunity. Is natural immunity something that we should be taking into consideration instead of just vaccinated individuals? So there's a lot that's been breaking the news this year.
Well, and including race relations. Let me get into something else.
Dr. Rocky and his gobbledygook. That made no sense. Nobody is talking about natural immunity. People are talking about getting the booster.
They are. Obviously, you're not a medical expert. You need to talk to the
booster is a big deal. The booster's a big deal this year.
But those are failing too, though, Charlie.
But guys, let's not get bogged down in this, because frankly, we don't have the answers. We don't know. The experts don't know either. We've got another variant, the third variant. We're doing the best we can based on what we know, and that's all we can do. Meanwhile, Charlie, I want to get to race relations, because the events we've seen in the courtroom may have improved race relations in this country. A jury found former police officer Derek Chauvin guilty of the murder for the death of George Floyd in Minnesota. Just today, Chauvin also pled guilty to federal charges for violating Floyd's civil right. And then you see what happened in Georgia. 3 white men found guilty, convicted of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Do you believe, Charlie, that race relations have improved in light of those verdicts?
I think what we've seen, though, is that we trust juries, and that juries this year have had a very major impact on race relations in those cases that you're talking about. And so, yes, I think that we have to trust the fact that we have a system in place that is there, that is relevant to now. And I think that we can try a case. And I don't think we can get bogged down. I mean, we want to talk about race relations, but the bottom line, if the facts are not there, a white person is going to be convicted or a black person. It doesn't matter if the facts are there, and we've seen them in this year. I think it's good.
But by the same token, Greg, remember the protests against police? Remember the cries to defund the police? Did it seem to you that those protesters went too far, especially when you look at the soaring crime rate in San Francisco and Los Angeles?
Well, I don't know if you can draw a direct line between people protesting about an unfair justice system or bad policing and a rising crime rate, considering some of the things that we've talked about in relationship to the economy. There has been, the big news, one of the big news stories certainly has been around our relationship to police and what we as a populace are willing to accept as acceptable policing. And the police, I believe, have done some soul searching in relationship to how they interact with the public too. I think when we get to the end of the year, I think that we have better policing now than we did when the year started, because folks have been more thoughtful about their approach.
Well, I think specifically of the new mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, who started her term as a woman who believed that it was time to reduce police funding. But now that she's seen an increased crime wave in her city, she says, no, we need to send in as many cops as possible. Do you think reality has set in this country?
Well, I don't think that people have abandoned the idea that that you also need to have more of the soft skill kind of stuff, the people that diffuse situations, social workers, counselors, folks that can deal with the mentally ill, so that our police officers don't have to be everything. They don't have to be the therapist and the EMS guy at the same time. And I don't think that those things were lost in San Francisco or any place else. The idea that our police department and our police officers can't be all things to all people, I really do think has settled in. And I don't think that we're going to lose this other component of policing, which is the social services, the mental illness support services for people they come in contact with, and for police officers. We're finally starting to recognize that there are traumas that occur with policing.
But we talk about that
but-
all the time, though, Greg, in terms of providing mental health support for police officers, triaging calls to make sure that they're responded, in the right way, compensating them, and having a police force that reflects the community they serve. That also makes a big difference. And I know that we lost residency here, and that's another big conversation. But when you have police officers or anybody that's sworn to protect and serve, and they're protecting and serving the community they live in, it's a whole different level of engagement. That shit.
Sharon, nobody wants to be a cop these days. I mean, the fact that when it's really important, when we are in danger, we want cops. We want cops in the schools right now because of the Oxford situation. But yet nobody wants to be a cop. We're not paying them enough money. We need to pay them more. We need to give them more benefits, and we need to treat them with respect. And we have to instill in the society that you go to a police officer, respect that police officer, and tell them when someone else commits the crime. I don't know that we have that yet. It's not quite
Shirley,
there.
Look, wait a minute. In that regard, let's go to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by thousands of right-wing lunatics, or as Donald Trump calls them, patriots, people who claim to believe in law and order and who support the police. They say beating police, ransacking the cathedral of democracy, and threatening to lynch the vice president. 700 people arrested for beating cops so they could overturn the election. So what then, Rocky, do you have to say about those people?
Well, let me first say something, Huel. And Donald Trump does not call those individuals that beat police officers and broke the law patriots. Those aren't patriots. Those aren't people that should be protected by the law, but should be prosecuted by the law. Those aren't patriots. Those are just as much, hold on, Huel. Those are just as much thugs as the people that ransacked the White House in the summer. Those are the same types of thugs that ransacked Oregon and the Seattle and Tacoma area and did the smash and grabs in Los Angeles and San Francisco. So please, let's not just talk about right wing. This permeates people on the left and right. And it's sad that we're just talking about social services. We should also be talking about punishment for anyone that breaks the law. I don't care if they're Republican or if they're a liberal, a leftist, if they're black, white, Chinese, Polish, anything. We should be judging people, like Martin Luther King said, by the content of their character, not by their color of their skin, but judge people by their actions. And we need to teach people how to respect others, Greg. And that's what it comes down to.
Wait, what? I know you didn't invoke my name in your little diatribe there trying to compare stealing stuff from Macy's with trying to overturn the country. Stop.
Or burn down the White House, or tear down Seattle, or do smash and grabs in Seattle. Come on, let's talk about those issues as well.
That is not comparable, Rocky.
Why are those?
They are not comparable.
The stuff that you're talking about, Rocky,
a crime is a crime. All crimes should be prosecuted.
Exactly, they should be
breaking the law.
Especially, but tell me this though.
Yeah.
Are we living in a country where still people believe the big lie? Do you, Rocky, believe that Donald Trump won the election and that the people who attacked the Capitol were justified in their reaction?
No, the people that attacked the Capitol had no justification to attack the Capitol. That has nothing to do with the president or the election of 2020. You can't connect those two. Those are individuals that committed crimes, and those people should be prosecuted. Period.
As should everyone.
He called those 700 people political prisoners, Rocky.
People that came out on January 6th to protest peacefully, to discuss and listen to speeches, were the ones that he called patriots. I'm not here to defend criminals that broke down the Capitol or broke down building walls in the Capitol or even the doors. And there's nothing to compare that. Greg, let's stop talking about those people. Let's talk about all criminals. Those people are just as much criminals as the leftists that tried to break down the walls in the White House this past summer.
No, that's not true, Rocky.
Yes.
That's not true. That's not true. Do you know the difference between crime and terrorism?
Terrorism
White House
is when you
and the
do
Capitol
something to
building
make
are
a
both
political
citadels
point.
of democracy, Greg.
I'm
They're
not
both
defending
citadels
people
of
that run into
democracy.
Macy's and steal all those Gucci bags and all
No.
that
No,
stuff.
no.
That's
Macy's
one,
doesn't
doesn't
talk
sell
about the
but that's
Gucci,
not the
Greg.
same
Macy's
thing
doesn't sell
as
Gucci.
trying to
All right.
overthrow the government.
We
Macy's
understand
doesn't
where
sell
we are.
Gucci, Greg.
All right, we understand where we
Oh,
are.
I'm sorry, Karen.
Look,
I don't-
we need to move on. We need to move on because there's
Sorry,
some
Karen.
other headlines we need to address. We need to go back to what happened in Oxford, what that did not only to the community there, but what it did to all of us here in Michigan and this country. Stay with us as Let It Rip continues. Well, welcome back to RIP. The social commentator Peter Manseau wrote that our response to school shootings typifies who we are. Once we decided that death was the price we were willing to pay to keep our guns, those who died no longer mattered because so many Americans, Ruth, are willing to trade the lives of our children, he says, for the right to bear arms. You were there at the Oxford Vigil. You were speaking. How do you see this great question before us now? What is the answer?
Well, I think there's a multitude of questions, and I've represented that area for decades. And in Brandon Township, a lot of the kids do go to Oxford schools. Senator Runstead and I were able to get through an extra $100,000 for counseling for mental health services for that area. And I'm also working on school safety legislation and funding in the Senate right now. And I know it's easy to be discouraged, but I think we're getting there. If we can get enough money so that the schools can put in the whatever safety that they need in those schools, that's very important. And I also think that I have Bill 798 Senate bill, and it would require when a child is talking about hurting others, killing others, that they would have to report it to the school safety officer. I think that is basic. It needs to be done, and that will help our kids. That, with the additional money that we're getting to be able to allow the schools to put in what they want for safety, I think is number one.
Well, panel, for the rest of this segment, I want to talk about the stories you think that we underreported, that we may have missed, and possibly your predictions for the future. Karen, what do you think?
Well, I think we ought to kind of watch, the World Economic Forum is talking about creating a global center for urban transformation here in the city of Detroit to actually use Detroit as an example for public-private partnerships. I think we need to watch that very closely, especially because we've seen how public-private partnerships have not benefited the public, at least here in the city of Detroit. And the World Economic Forum members are not coming here to provide social services. So I think we need to really, really pay attention to that and the implications that can have on Detroit residents and this region.
I think we're going to start to focus, though. I want to go back to Oxford for a moment. There are elected school boards, and I don't know that people realize that. We elect the leaders to basically regulate an entire school district, and that affects so many people. Now, I understand the legislature is getting involved, but, there probably has to be some discussion on guns and magazine and limitations on ammunition. And I know a lot of people don't want to talk about that, but I think there probably does have to be some kind of a discussion about that. And what I do think we're going to see in Oxford is that I think we're going to see, this immunity where basically schools cannot be sued. And I think that that's a problem. I think once schools can be sued, if the legislature relaxes the eliminate the immunity from lawsuits, I think they're going to take a real hard look. And insurance companies are going to be insured. And I think the people that govern the schools, the elected school boards, the public will make sure that they, in fact, make sure those schools are safe. Right now, if you're immune, if you don't have to be, you can't be sued for a lackadaisical safety. Who cares? I think that is going to change.
Policy is not going to change this. After Sandy Hook, if nothing changed, I don't think anything's really going to change.
You can't sue a school right now. Sue them.
Yeah,
but that has
Charlie,
nothing to do with it. If in fact you're supposed to report if a child says or does something to a safety officer, as Ruth is proposing, that's great. But then the safety officer has to be responsible for responding affirmatively. He's got to do something. People have to care. They have to pay attention. If they see a need, they have to respond. That's not a policy. That's a practice. That's a personal commitment.
But if they don't, Karen, here's the problem. If they they don't do that, they don't get the right people in, you can't sue a school district.
Wait a minute,
From a legal
Charlie.
perspective, Charlie, I mean, it goes
Charlie,
beyond
there's a-
that.
Gotta change.
There's a
Gotta
stop
change.
there where when you talk about gross negligence, and if the school exercised gross negligence, you can sue. You can override that
Good luck.
governmental
Now, with
immunity.
the cases coming down now, good luck. Figer's going to try, but good luck.
But everybody's
just-
exploiting this, you know?
And that still doesn't get rid of the guns. That
Exactly.
still
But again,
doesn't-
Huel,
that still
Huel,
does not
46
get rid of the guns or the child's access to the guns. And I don't want to
No,
be
That's
honest,
the key. That's the key. 46 different laws were broken, and the child should have never had access. And we'll see what happens with Karen McDonald's prosecution of the parents, because here we have some evidence that the parents may have given this gun to the child. And that's what's going to be the linchpin here. And we'll see what the legislature says. But that's already illegal. 46 different laws were broken, Huel.
Yes,
You know,
but
you gotta
the-
look at
yes, but the child
from a
still
different
got
perspective
the
as
gun.
well.
Charlie
child still
makes a
got the
really
gun.
good point in relationship to the schools. And one of the things that I think we didn't miss on, or that is really underreported, is this idea of accountability. Rocky, you talked about the parents, we talked about the prosecution, but that school system failed those students, particularly
That's right.
the 4 that were murdered. Now, the people that are in charge, I cannot believe that they had a school board meeting yesterday and nobody talked about firing the superintendent. Nobody talked about the principal being on leave. Nobody talked about the greatest failure of a counseling session in history and whether or not those people are still counselors. I mean, this is ridiculous. A parent stands up and says, you have to earn our trust. Well, you know, the way to earn the trust back is to start holding people accountable. Everybody ain't going to jail. But that superintendent, just like a general, Rocky, or an admiral who's responsible for what goes on that base, that superintendent is responsible, and as opposed to stepping up, offering his letter of resignation to the board, apologizing to the community, he instead announces that he is going to extend his retirement date. Are you kidding me? This is insane. So you know, the qualified immunity thing, Charlie, I agree. It might become a bigger issue, should become a bigger story as things go on next year. Certainly,
Shocking that Greg and I agree.
What the Supreme Court does as it relates to abortion, and that old 1930s law that's on the books here in Michigan that would make it a felon if they overturn Roe versus Wade. Getting an abortion in Michigan, providing an abortion in Michigan would be a felony. And if that happens, that's going to be like huge news. And Rocky's buddies on the Republican side have already staked out the ground, and that they're not going to overturn that law no matter what.
Well, that is what we'll talk about if we have time for final thoughts. What you see in the future. What do you think will come in the year ahead? That and more when Let It Rip returns. A few seconds for final thoughts on what will happen in the year ahead. Ruth.
Yes, I think we're going to see some top quality candidates get involved in the gubernatorial race. And I think that we might not see it right this minute, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. In the meanwhile, we need to pull together and support one another in our communities, especially as we go through this very difficult time.
Greg.
I think Roe versus Wade is going to be challenged. I think it may actually be overturned. And I think that fight for women's rights is going to take hold in Michigan, and it's going to propel the governor to victory.
Rocky.
I see a red tsunami happening in 2022. People are tired of the leftists and socialists in the Democratic Party and what the lack of leadership in the Democratic Party. I also predict that the Lions will win more than 2 games next year.
I think that honestly, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of the same thing. If we're going to continue to talk about the issues that we've been talking about this year, last year, and before, I think we need to move away from politics, start looking at the person, start looking at personal accountability, and looking at each other for who we are. We've got a lot more in common than we have than difference.
Well said, panel. We thank you. We thank you for watching this edition of Let It Rip.